I'm Linda Wigington, and I'm working with a team of folks as part of the ROCUS initiative. ROCUS stands for Reducing Outdoor Contaminants in Indoor Spaces. It's an initiative focused on southwestern Pennsylvania and focused specifically on reducing the impact of outdoor air pollution in spaces where we live, work, and play. Our primary emphasis has been in the residential sector, and our primary current project involves bringing in a group of people every month, equipping them with a kit with a bunch of monitoring equipment, supporting their process of exploring what they find in their homes, and meanwhile collecting lots of data. The third thing we're trying to do, so the first thing is to find out how well low-cost monitors work in terms of, do they confound people, do they empower people, do they confuse people, are they clear, how accurate do they seem to be, what are problems with using monitors over a long period of time. So that was item number one. Item number two is to get the baseline data so we have a sense of what numbers you typically see, particularly on particles. And then the third thing is to find out what we can learn about interventions that actually greatly reduce the particle exposure to people when they're in homes. So I'm going to primarily address the issue of reducing particle exposure. The meter that we're using is the Dylos 1700. We buy them in bulk quantity and pay $300 a piece. The disadvantage of that monitor in some ways is it's not Wi-Fi enabled, though that might be something that we'll be able to modify in some of the units as we go forward with the retrofit. But at this point, it only holds data for 8 to 9 days, and that data is 1 minute resolution at both 0.5 and above, and also 2.5 and above microns. So we get two different channels, we get a date and time stamp. And then because it only holds 8 or 9 days, the folks that are participating have to master doing downloads on their computers, and they're the ones that send us the data as well as logs. So what we've done is, with over 100 houses, probably 30 folks have monitored for a lot longer than a month, and some people just cycle through in the 1 month cohort. We've seen a tremendous variation from high to low, 10 to 1 difference in the median indoor air quality. In many homes, we see a huge range within any given home for their monitoring period. It can range from levels just even within the 50th percentile. It can be a huge range of everything from going from what would be on the poor scale to the good scale. We've been able to dig in and look more closely, and we do have a lot of information on house characteristics. So we're still just beginning to analyze that data to see correlations. But we've definitely seen some impact of our interventions. And one of the main interventions we've explored is filtration. So filtration in two ways. Filtration using a high MER filter in a central air handler, like an air handler that's either the furnace or the AC system. And then also we've experimented with portable air cleaners, and we've gotten some donated, have 4 or 5 homes with 2 to 3 air cleaners, looking at that effect, both in a small space and a larger space. And also we've experimented with a fan filter. A fan filter is a 20-inch box fan with a $30 filter taped on. And in terms of just dropping particles, the fan filter is pretty impressive, and it's 30, 40, 50 watts. Usually no one has it on high because it's just too noisy on high. But at 30 watts, it's pretty amazing how it often really drops the counts quickly into what we would see usually the excellent range, which is fairly rare unless you're doing filtration. So what we've experimented with, and what our concerns were for using filters in central air systems, is that we know that there can be problems that if you put a really good filter in, you don't have enough airflow, and that can change the performance of the heating system or cooling system. We also know that in our climate, we tend to have ducts that are undersized for the furnace and particularly AC. Our results should clearly be seen within the context of our climate and our housing stock, which is we've got basements, and our furnaces are typically basement furnaces with sheet metal ducts, a big range of age, but it's fairly typical for the ducts, most of the ducts to be in the basement, except for ones as they go to a second floor, and in almost all cases, all of the ducts are inside either the house or basement. We don't have many cases at all where that wouldn't be the case. So the question is, we wanted to find out if there was a very easy way just to determine whether or not you could put a high MERV filter in. And is that something a homeowner could do themselves? Well, in doing 5 or 6 initial tests, we came to the conclusion, no. You can't tell enough information with any kind of simple diagnostic like, seeing if you feel a difference in airflow or seeing if there's a difference in temperature with the furnace on with the better filter. So we answered that one pretty quickly, but that led to a whole series of things we were really fascinated with. And we now have what we call a 2.5 hour diagnostic visit with a pretty clear protocol. And we've done 24 furnaces and central AC systems. What we consistently find is that when you measure the total external static, we measure it in segments over the system because we want to know where the restriction might be. So we're measuring external static, which is an indication of airflow and pressure, bursting pressure of the system. We measure across the supply side, the filter, the return side, and the coil. TESP is total external static, and it is on the nameplate. So there's a number that we know that system, that blower, was designed to have. And we've got 3 systems, it might be up to 4 by now, that actually was within that number at the typical firing rate of the furnace or the air conditioning mode. And at that, what we were surprised is, in many cases, the blower was running too hard. I mean, the blower was at the highest speed. It was on factory setting. No one ever changed it. So it was fascinating to see that because we're actually getting too much airflow that would limit the ability of central air conditioners to dehumidify as much as possible, and also would tend to make the house less comfortable because it would come on and go off. So we've gotten some really neat feedback from our participants and saying, oh, the house is so much more comfortable now. And usually you can shave a little bit off the wattage when you drop the airflow down. So we are measuring airflow, we're measuring watt draw, we're measuring total external static. We're doing it in most cases with a clean filter, assuming we got one available. In some cases, looking and comparing a clean and a dirty filter. So our conclusion is that if you use any filter in an air handler and run it 24/7, I mean by any filter, a higher MERV filter, like at least MERV 8, but MERV 11 or 13. We do not have MERV 16s available where you can find them easily, so nobody's using those. So if you use the MERV 11, 13, and run it continuously, your numbers are surprising. I mean, in terms of what we're looking at with particles. You just end up like in an excellent zone. I mean, people are looking and saying, I didn't know my numbers could go that low. This is amazing. The counts are just really, really dropping. If you don't do it continuously, we haven't been able to see that the folks with high MERV filters are that much different than folks that don't have high MERV filters. We just haven't seen, or that they're better when their air handler's on, like in the wintertime versus spring. So it doesn't appear that running the air handler in the auto mode has much impact. The challenge is that what we've seen is much higher energy use than we expected. So the energy use of the PSC motors tends to be high, and we've seen a pretty big range of 400 watt draw to actually 1500 watt draw. So that would mean that if you had 1,000 watt draw, you'd be using 24 kilowatt hours a day if you put that in the on mode. 24 kilowatt hours a day is $2.40. A lot of money, a lot of energy over the course of a year. If somebody's sick and this makes a difference in them feeling better, that might not seem that much, but from an energy perspective, that's a major liability. So what we wanted to do was figure out, are there things we can do to change that so we can drop the energy use and increase the performance? And right now, we've only modified a few systems this way, but we're thinking we're on the right path. And that is, we are seeing when we can put in an ECM electrocommutated motor, and they allow us to use a much lower fan speed. In most cases, the systems we find run in high fan speed if you put it in continuous, which shouldn't be the case, but that's just how they were set at the factory. And often cases with a PSC motor, we can't turn it down. So it's just a major barrier in terms of energy cost. So the ECM can help, but then we need to make sure we're not creating a problem with the total external static being higher than it should be. So we also wanted better filters, because 1-inch pleated filters tend to be contribute to very high total external static pressure. So we're changing out what you call the return drop, which is the piece of sheet metal. Usually it's 8 by 25 inches. It comes from the ceiling, moves down to the floor, makes a 90 and goes into the furnace. And at that point, usually a 1-inch filter or maybe a 4-inch filter is right there, right at the base, right against the furnace. What we're doing is making that drop bigger. We're getting it custom made, so it's 8 by, usually 12 by 25. We're coming out in a bell in order to accommodate a bigger filter. We're starting to put multiple filter channels in there, so there's the opportunity for a 2-inch filter as a pre or another filter as a post, so that if somebody didn't want to replace the 4-inch filter, there would be a less expensive filter option. And then we reduce a lot of static by having better flow patterns. So what we've been able to do in a few cases is go from maybe 800, 700, 900 watts to 110. But then that 110 is low enough, that's like 2 kilowatt hours, 2.5 kilowatt hours a day, that you can actually afford. That's 25 cents. So that would be $8, $10 a month. You could afford to run it continuously. We set it so it's a continuous operation, and the particle counts are amazingly low. Now we still have variations in source strength. We still have the potential that there's air leaking around the filters, and we need to address to make sure we've got really tight seals. But that's the basis of what we're doing. Now then the question is, well, how often do you have to replace the filter? So we're going to be adding magnehelic gauges on these systems so the homeowner can tell what the change is in the pressure over the filter, and that should be a good indication. We had thought we had to change them pretty often. If Ian Walker's right, he says, hey, a year would be fine, or at least 6 months. So it's not just when they look dirty. The 4-inch filter might be very resistant to clogging because of its aerodynamics, which would be fantastic, because that's a significant cost. So we think we're at something that works very well with basement ducts, sheet metal ducts, undersized ducts. In our climate, which is pretty much southwestern Pennsylvania, our systems are common all across the mid-Atlantic states, certainly New England and Midwest. What we're learning would not apply where you have a remote filter. It wouldn't necessarily apply at all in terms of the advisability of running an air handler continuously if you have duct leakage to an attic or somewhere else. So we were really looking forward to collaborating with folks here at the conference and getting more data and really bouncing our data with other people. But we've got feedback tools that allow us to give this feedback to our participants, and they can see the effect of what they're doing in order to reinforce continued stuff. In terms of portable air cleaners, we see varied results. It really seems to depend on which one, how big of a room, how it's operated. And the key problem is most people are not comfortable running a portable air cleaner that has to move a fair bit of air in order to filter the air, and makes you uncomfortable in the winter. People like them a lot in the summer because it's comfort. In the winter, it's discomfort. So we're playing with some very creative strategies to solve that.